Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webcast, BI Software Drives Value, the next wave of customers' business strategies, which reviews high-level findings of our BI software customer research. My name is Allison Crawford, and I'm hosting today's webinar. Business intelligence remains a market of top interest for buyers and software vendors alike, with trend-setting firms such as Tableau shaking up customers' perceptions while enterprise software vendors evolve broader deployments to embed analytics and become agile in the market. TBR's Business Intelligent Customer Research examines the performance of frontrunners in the market based on feedback from the buyers themselves, including sales, portfolio success, and customer satisfaction across the BI software market by segment. In the next 45 minutes or so, we'll cover the drivers of BI software, how it is relating to BI services offerings, how customers are adopting these solutions, and what business models you should be aware of. Before I pass this over to the analysts, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Matt, Jen, and Elizabeth will address them at the end of the presentation. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for a private, more detailed discussion, please reach out to either any of them or myself at the end of the presentation to set up that conversation. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the presentation. You can also find these slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight, and we'll share all the social media links with you again at the end of the presentation. Now let me introduce Matt Healy, Elizabeth Hedstrom-Hanlon, and Jen Hamill. Matt is our Principal Software and Services Analyst at TBR. Elizabeth is our Lead Analyst covering Enterprise and BI software and has been working closely with the vendors covered in this report to understand their business models and strategies. Jen Hamill is an analyst in TBR's professional services practice, where she was responsible for coverage of IT services vendors, including IBM Global Services, and is the lead author of TBR's customer research and vendor benchmark reports on the BI professional services market. Combined, their expertise and perspective brings a detailed and actionable perspective of the opportunities in BI software and services. And with that, let me hand this over to Matt.
Hi, and as the Principal Software and Services Analyst, I get what I consider to be one of the most enviable jobs on these webcasts. I don't have to talk to the slides. Elizabeth and Jen are more than capable of doing that. They put together a really interesting deck. What I get to do is I get to be effectively, if you watch Monday Night Football religiously the way I do, I get to be the color commentator. So from a macro perspective on what we're seeing in terms of BI, you can argue that analytics has been going on in the enterprise since, the first computer with vacuum tubes, because we've basically been analyzing data. But what we're seeing now is the increased power and the ability for BI software to be propagated out beyond just the IT departments into a lot of other departments. And so what we're seeing is while the industry is mature, it does not mean that all of your customers are mature. They are maturing. So we're seeing a real scattershot of different departments and different people try to use BI for slightly different things. So as a result, as you go through this, it's important to kind of keep in mind that in some pockets of the market, like the data warehousing and the more traditional areas, you're going to run into very mature customers who really understand what they're after, and they really know what they want, and they're going to be asking you very focused questions. But then oftentimes, even within the same large enterprise, you're going to see other departments that know that analytics could help, but they're not really sure how. And so you'll see some people looking to drive revenue, some people looking to drive down costs. And so what we've discovered is in order for you to be most successful at expanding your portfolio and really understanding what's going on, you have to be able to, your account reps have to be able to first understand where your customer is on the maturity cycle, and then more detailed, if they're not very mature, what they're trying to accomplish with it. So keep that lens in mind as Elizabeth walks through the results of this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Matt. And I think that's a great jumping off point for our broader discussion today. And Jen is joining us from the services side of our house. They did a more dedicated deep dive on the services level insights of this research a couple of weeks ago. I think when we look at our holistic business intelligence program, it's really fascinating to watch the pendulum swing between the buyer needs, the vendor action, and the portfolio growth that goes with it. So we're going to bounce back and forth for all of you between helping you get some new insights into your buyers themselves and our thoughts on where you as the vendors in this market can move to take advantage of what they need and when they have it. When we look at the big picture of the business intelligence software vendor landscape, I think there is a key point to note here, which ironically doesn't diverge all that much from the broader enterprise software landscape as we see it. This is really about how can you as the vendors in this market stay agile in meeting the breadth and depth of vendor needs. I just saw we had a question come in from one of our attendees, and we'll take questions online throughout the whole discussion and then address those at the end of the call. When we look at the broader business intelligence software market, we see a slow and steady growth in this market across the next 4 to 5 years, working around how customers are moving from departmental deployments of incremental point products to enterprise-wide views of how they can not only better understand their business, but also change the way their business is run. And that's where you see various approaches from a vendor perspective in terms of how do you talk to those buyers. Well, those buyers are not uniform. They're not uniform by segment. They're not even uniform by industry. So the criticality for all of you is how can you move from one to the other without unduly burdening yourself with a lot of cost and a lot of overhead. And where we see the opportunity is how do you as the vendors in this space link between your technologist portfolios that your IT users and buyers clearly understand, and how do you then empower your IT users to be the evangelist to the line of business buyer, who is not only very involved in this process, but is a key decision maker in terms of not only the vendor shortlisting at the beginning of the process, but the final decision-making step at the end. And that's where we see a real opportunity that spans not only software segments, but services segments as well. So for those of you, I see some familiar names on our attendee list today who've joined us in our business intelligence software vendor benchmark discussion. This statistic shouldn't come as anything relatively new. We see some acceleration of this market around particular segments, but overall it's a stable 4 to 5% compound annual growth rate across the next 4 years. But what's changing is that it's not just about the technology anymore and about the novelty of the technology. It's about how those technologies look at not just better performance, faster performance, but how they start to really move into new levels of business change. How do they create new operational efficiencies? How do they help customers more effectively scale resources they already have internally and change their decision-making processes going forward? But as I'm sure all of you know from your customers, there may be slightly more dollars than there were in 2010 and 2011 in terms of customer purchasing, but there is by no means that much. So it's about how do you take $1 worth of customer spend and turn it not just into $3 of return on investment, but do so in half the time that you would have had to deliver those results a couple of years ago. Moving on, there we go. When we looked at the main criteria for purchasing business intelligence software and use, this was everyone who identified across our taxonomy segments, and I'll take a minute and just talk to those at a very high level. For those of you that would like more detail, we will absolutely set up a private call to go through the taxonomy with you in as much detail as you would like. But our look at the business intelligence market was really defined by the end customer. When we talked to them about their path to business intelligence migration, they walked us through the point-by-point levels of purchase that they followed to really first better understand their business, the data they had in-house, then change how they acted upon that data before finally now moving to a point at which they would transform the way their business is run and operated. So those basic tools include offerings like reporting, dashboarding, scorecarding. The advanced tools look at offerings such as event processing, content analytics, and data visualization and data mining. And then finally, applications and platforms we've seen as a very recent evolution in this market, which was really driven by many of you and your companies on the phone today. When customers look to all of you for renewals, not just of business intelligence offerings, but the broader universe in which those offerings are purchased and deployed, the applications and platforms is that multi-function single SKU product that addresses dashboarding, OLAP, and data visualization, or scorecarding, predictive analytics, and data mining. The ability to streamline and simplify how those offerings are sold helps not only all of you protect your installed bases, but also helps those customers that were late to this market, who, by the way, are no more confident than they were 2 years ago, but now they know they're behind the curve, and now they're trying to get up to speed as quickly as possible with the minimal amount of disruption. That's where the applications and platforms category is really seeing a lot of growth. And so now going back to the graph in front of you, advanced analytics is clearly still a point of significant interest, so long as the ability to bring those products into a customer's environment becomes non-disruptive. Because when the leading purchasing category, and you'll notice for data warehousing it's of particular importance, because those data warehouses, I should note, we segment this market to look at data warehousing and information management only as it applies to business intelligence. Data warehousing being closest to the business's data means that it is a category where those buyers are incredibly risk averse. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So if you are a point product vendor, your ability to prove that you are heterogeneous in terms of the platforms you play with is critical. If you are a multi-line vendor, showing that you are able to be both incremental and comprehensive in terms of what you can bring to bear for your customers makes it most possible for you to stay front and center in consideration in this market.
Yeah, and I just want to add something, because once again, my job color, is that if you're a point product vendor, we can't really stress the importance of being able to integrate with the existing platforms enough, because if you are a point product vendor, then what you're likely trying to sell, especially if you're focused on the lobs, is a solution to a lob problem. And that line of business, while they're getting increased influence over IT decisions, doesn't mean they're going to have really the authority to deploy a platform or deploy a tool, or even going to want to deploy a tool that won't work with whatever major IT platform they're on. So if they're on an SAP system, you have to be able to demonstrate you can work with HANA and the SAP system. If they're on a Microsoft application, then you have to be able to demonstrate that you work with those organizations. Make sure you can work with the major application vendors, or else you're not really going to get anywhere within that line of business. And so I just wanted to make sure that that got called out as something that was critical, and I'll pass it back to Elizabeth.
And I think looking at a question that's in the queue right now, business intelligence competency centers we think are still very essential, though we'll talk about that and the data governance, data scientist role as we go a little bit further along. But clearly this is a question that we will also follow up on with a dedicated call going forward, because the study does touch on that in some more significant detail. Because, and this is one of those graphs that candidly got me a little bit geeked out about the data itself. When we did the original version of this study a little while ago, reduce expenses, speed decision making were really top of mind, but those just show that it's new. BI was new. It was a quick path to help me save money. Now when we look at the reasons for why people are looking at investing in or upgrading their existing BI software, now you look at items 2 and 3 on the list: efficient management of processes, improving internal efficiency. Those are quantifiable business outcomes, which shows that the maturity of buyers has reached a point for all of you to keep a very close eye on. They know where they need to go. Some of them need help getting there. Most of them just need a piece part. And whether it's a small part or many small parts or one large part, They are educated consumers now that know where they can go with your help. Now, it's worth noting as well that we see a bigger part, the disruption of cloud on traditional on-premise selling, it's impacting this market. We don't think it's really started to fully impact this market yet, though I think the recent announcements out of Oracle Open World, as well as from folks like IBM and SAP about cloud-delivered BI, I think show that the next time we do this piece of research, cloud BI is going to be a pretty critical top-of-mind piece of advisory for us to give to all of you. But what is most important here is that cloud consumption has changed the broader software buying landscape, and this is where all of you please take note. For those customers that are mature enough to know that a piece of data visualization software will help me derive business insights, they don't feel the need to stay loyal anymore if there is a cheaper, more effective, more efficient option out there. And so defection risks, I think, are at an all-time high in this market.
Yeah, and when we do this piece of research next year, which is when I'm assuming that we're gonna do it, I think we're absolutely going to put some focus into what cloud BI is going to do to the traditional selling motions. At a minimum, when you think about, once again, if you're a point product vendor or if you're a platform vendor, you have to have that focus in there because you're starting to see some real migration, and a lot of customers see that hybrid cloud is the direction that they want to go with their applications. It is the direction that most vendors are going, and so if your BI tool doesn't work in a hybrid environment, then you may not get shortlisted at this point in time. So while it may not have to be cloud delivered, it is going to have to work with cloud delivered applications, and that's absolutely going to be a must. I don't think you can plug into SAP without having your partner channel mention HANA Enterprise Cloud, probably within the first 30 seconds of your meeting, and then probably 35 times within the next half hour.
Or Bluemix,
or
SoftLayer,
yeah, or any of those guys. So if you look at the big apps providers that you're going to have to work with, that's the direction they're going. If you're a platform vendor, that's the direction your customers are going. I got a feeling we're going to be adding questions next year.
Exactly.
Call it a hunch.
And another note for all of you, they're not done. Buyers are not done. They know that this is where they can get the most return on their investment in very short order. So how do you as the vendors create urgency in a market that is being really portrayed as mature? But your customers know that there is need here. Their line of business buyers know that they have to change the way they make decisions to drive growth in an economy that continues to show, I think, a lot of macroeconomic fits and starts. And when we look, by the way, within the research, macroeconomic conditions are one of the biggest top-line concerns now and 3 years from now for these buyers in terms of what is directly impacting their business, what is keeping them up at night. They don't feel good about the broader economy, and so they know they have to change things now. How do you as the vendors keep them in your corner? Make sure they understand that the urgency they feel is something that you hear and can address quickly. So we talked earlier about our taxonomy. What we've done here is really broken that down into the various component piece parts because we really wanted to see where the needle had moved from when we did this study before and now, and in terms of what customers have and are continuing to implement versus where are they going in the future. And we were pleased to see that the majority of our advanced tools offerings are still in the coming soon section. So you look at the amount of acquisitions and IPOs around predictive analytics and data visualization in particular, and clearly this is something that is, we talked about this market being, I think, very equally driven by buyer need and vendor activity, and this is one of those cases that shows that to be true, where Matt and I and Jen and Patrick Heffernan, who's one of our other services principal analysts, we've been, bouncing the ball around the room to try to figure out what's coming. And I think myself, when you look at the level of social media analytics being embedded into competitive marketing clouds. I think that's where BI and cloud, really comes crashing into each other in not just even the next 6 months, but the next 3 months. So taking these from a feature discussion up to a business value discussion, it's difficult. I think this is where bridging through your IT user, this is where you bridge through your IT user, you use what you can do and your ability to tell a business narrative to position your IT user as that key evangelist inside of his own organization. Now the line of business buyer sees the IT buyer as an ally and not just a cost center. Everyone is set up to win, and you've not only established yourself as a trusted advisor, you've created an ideal position for share wallet expansion going forward. So I'm going to start with the vendor landscape here. We just kept it to top of mind because when we looked at this broader market, we had about 30 vendors on the list for software and another probably 20 additional vendors around services. And I'm going to hand this off to Jen in a moment to do a little bit of a services spotlight. But I think when we look at the big picture in terms of the leaders in this space, leaders are able to position end-to-end solutions to very big installed bases. Basic tools and advanced tools in particular really show the depth and extent to which your customers took your fundamental points of software, if you're IBM, SAP, Microsoft, and Oracle, and try to do more with what they already had. And then when you look at the advanced tools offerings, this is where you start to see some of the pure play disruption coming in from folks like Tableau, Pentaho, ClickTech, Burst, Good Data. How did they take one fundamental point of customers' pain around understanding rapidly growing amounts of data and try to transform the way in which it was delivered and done? The business intelligence applications and platforms category, I think, is really where you're going to start to see our friends on the consulting and systems integration side of the house influencing who's leading in this market and why. A lot of the software vendors that we see in business intelligence are really capitalizing on existing ecosystem relationships across those services firms to drive a business intelligence agenda, and that's where firms like Accenture, and I'm stealing Jen's thunder here, so I'll give it to her in a minute, are going to become more not just implementers, but transformative entities inside of business intelligence and figuring out what the next wave of software that leaders can deliver can be. And so with that, I will hand it to Jen.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So yes, just as Elizabeth mentioned, as the conversations turn from point solutions to more transformational business intelligence agendas, the role of the service provider is becoming more and more important. And as I'll go into this graph in just a second, but just to set the stage for the, as Elizabeth mentioned, for the survey, we gave a long list of services vendors as options for who customers are using to help implement these solutions. It included all the major systems integrators. It included more hardware-centric players, management consultants, the India-centric applications houses. So we really gave a very broad spectrum of the market for just to make sure that we're getting everyone included. But still, these 4 rows to the top, and as you'll remember from the previous slide, these 4 vendors were also the top 4 BI software vendors. And the reason for this is, as Elizabeth mentioned, as these conversations are more about customers' business models and not just about IT, trust is so important. And what we're seeing is right now customers, the person that they trust the most with their BI implementations is the BI software provider. So there are a couple of reasons for this. Either they're not familiar with the additional value that a systems integrator, a technology-agnostic systems integrator could provide, or in the case of IBM, which provides a end-to-end solution, including services, they're discovering that they can get all the services that they need from one vendor, including the BI strategy. So I'll talk about IBM in a little more detail later, but just to focus on the other 3 vendors, SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft, they're really in this market, the BI services market, out of necessity. They're here because the customers of their software, they need them to provide the services. They, in some cases, only want to work with one vendor. So these software vendors are providing the services because they need to, but they would much rather pull in their systems integrator partners to handle the customization and integration side. And really, the systems integrators are much better suited for that because they have the industry expertise, the consulting background, and the ability to really hold the customer's hand through the process.
Right. And just as an aside, I'll give Jen an opportunity to take a breath here. This is a place in which the SAP, Oracle, Microsoft of the world are very comfortable. They understand that with a new market and with a new set of capabilities, in most cases, the initial services providers will be the software providers. And what their jobs are, and they understand this, is to seed the market, demonstrate the capabilities, demonstrate and build the demand to the point where the Accentures, I won't use IBM because they're kind of a hybrid, but call it the real high-powered systems integrators, Deloitte, EY, CFC, CAP, Atos, the Indian-centric vendors can all then move up to the forefront and start scaling the software solution out. SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft will always care more about their software and their SaaS license revenue than they do about their services revenue. And the big services firms, the EY, Deloitte, et cetera, that I mentioned, will always care more about their services revenue and margins. It's just the way that this market shapes out. So we expect here at TBR that over the next, say, 4 to 6 quarters, you're going to start to really see that transition accelerate. I can't tell you what I'm looking at for exactly why. I've just watched enough of these markets transition that way to say, when we run this next year, it'll probably be a smattering of software vendors and services vendors, and when we run it 2 years from now, I would expect to see the top-notch systems integrators, Deloitte, EY, CAP, CFC, et cetera, all at the top. But that's where we think things are going. I know it's not bold because it's an established pattern, but I think it's going to hold. Well,
and that's a point that Matt and I have brought to you all when we talked about from the Business Intelligence Software Vendor Benchmark webinar a couple of months ago. This is a market where we're watching spending patterns from a software perspective and really from a services perspective as well behave like other enterprise software segments, not like cloud. Yeah. So it is a market that is evolutionary, not revolutionary, and that's a critical piece of advice we can give to all of you, in that your ability to beat your competitors will be that much more effective when you think outside of established spending patterns, because almost everyone, with the exception of a few folks like Splunk, is treating this like another software business.
Yeah, and it's my contention that the reason for that is that the dominant players in each of the three architectures that you use for BI, the dominant four are all big established companies. SAP is probably the dominant provider of in-app analytics. Oracle and Microsoft are the dominant providers of in-database analytics, and IBM is the dominant player in standalone analytics. These are all big companies with big company business models and big company shareholder reporting requirements and big company board of directors. So they can't get away with the kind of the crazy outside of the box stuff that somebody like Salesforce could have gotten away with, 15 years ago, because the market just doesn't work that way.
Okay, so just moving to the next slide, just as a segue, we can see that customers agree that they need hand-holding. Just looking at the top 4 important factors in evaluating BI solutions, it's all about contact. Contact with systems integrators and advisors, contact with consultants, sales reps. They really are looking for as much outside help that they can get to determine what direction they need to go, and then to help them through the process. So this aligns with, and Patrick and I are happy to speak with anyone in more detail about the services study, but just as a high-level overview, the advisory services segment of the advisory and consulting segment of the BI services market was the highest adopted service line that we found in our study. And this is no surprise. I mean, we saw this in cloud as well. So as customers are trying to figure out these solutions, advisory is the first place they go, but we're expecting that the other service lines, including the customization and the management of those solutions, are going to grow in adoption. So as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, BI customers, they aren't as concerned with cost, but rather ensuring that the solution can be deployed quickly and seamlessly within their IT environment. And this is because everyone's concerned about achieving their business outcomes, not necessarily just having the newest tool. So this is where your systems integrator partner can play an integral role in explaining how a BI solution will work within their environment, how it will help them achieve their goals, and getting those solutions deployed quickly. So on the next slide, let's look at two of the vendors that are leading in the BI strategy space. I wanted to focus on two different types of vendors here. These are two that rose to the top in the customer adoption study, as well as the when we were looking at the vendor revenue side of things in our vendor benchmark. These are the two that are really leading the BI services space. But they have very different strategies for obvious reasons that I'll explain here. So Accenture is an example of a systems integrator with a strong client-focused consulting that it translates well to the BI transformation space. They've been doing transformations for a long time. They're a trusted name, so customers are very comfortable working with them. They have strong relationships with BI software providers, and they're constantly adding new alliances to keep their expertise a step ahead of where the market is going. And IBM is a clear leader, as I mentioned before. Their ability to combine software, hardware, and services into end-to-end offerings, and they have not only their own offerings, but the ability to assist with implementations of SAP and Oracle and other BI software offerings. So they really have the scale to be everything to everyone. And for IBM, leading with strategy, with their strategy and analytics practice, and following through with the analytics, it really enables IBM to appeal both to the LOB buyer through the business outcome conversations, but also their technology legacy helps them to speak directly to the IT concerns, particularly around security and interoperability of solutions. So just to wrap up here, customers they're looking for services vendors to expedite the migration of BI applications and to develop solutions. IBM speaks to this need by offering accelerated proofs of concept and deployment paths, but other vendors are also quickly moving in this area. But as Elizabeth will explain next, the urgency that customers have around BI is not just about getting their hands on the latest and greatest tools, but also getting to value as quickly as possible.
Because when push comes to shove, it's all about trust. We were talking about the real disruption pending in this market around CNSI vendors building relationships that help customers understand the full extent of the transformation. Because when you look at the software purchasing patterns, we talked at the beginning of this about your maturing buyers. They know what they want, they know where they need to go, and by the way, they expect you all to deliver it in 2 years or less. So especially when you're looking at some of these bigger departmental to enterprise-wide migrations, that's a big ask and that's a big, big move, and there is no patience for any delays or failures any longer because the line of business buyer is now watching and the IT buyer feels that pressure. So where you can enable, empower, and streamline, the more you are set up to be successful. Now, we're going to look at some segments for a minute here, and I'll tell you that the 4 leading vendors, as we talked about, really continue to be SAP, Microsoft, IBM, and Oracle. As Matt pointed out, that's not a surprise. When you're looking at large installed bases around core products for SAP, the business application, for Microsoft and Oracle, the database, for IBM, kind of a hybrid of the two, it's very easy to take the idea of business intelligence and bring it out through existing stories and through existing relationships. But what we thought was interesting here, now remember we spoke for a moment about basic BI tools being those first levels of reporting online analytical processing, dashboarding, scorecards, data warehousing, those data warehouses for business intelligence. Those became the most, ironically, risk-averse buyers that we saw, because when we looked at the three leading vendors, on the left it's SAP, Microsoft, and IBM, and on the right it's SAP, Microsoft, and Oracle. Previous relationship with the vendor was the key criteria across the board, and when we looked at deeper knowledge, deeper insights than that, it was about how do you link that BI technology to a broader portfolio? How do you, Mr. Vendor, understand my IT infrastructure? These buyers don't want disruption, they want speed, effectiveness, and transformation. The Wild West really exists in the advanced BI tools category and the applications and platforms category, and that's where I think the business value narrative is coming into focus, or there's the opportunity to shape it going forward. So when looking at the leading advanced BI tools categories, from top to bottom, it's SAP, IBM, and Microsoft, you'll notice that the criteria were a lot closer, and what we see here, I think that's most telling, is the customer knows what they want, and they're not necessarily wedded to a legacy relationship to provide it, especially for those vendors that can tell a credible, heterogeneous story with customer proof points behind it. And for applications and platforms on the right, this is where disruptive platform vendors that can tell a story around how do you tie into IBM DB2, SAP ERP, and Microsoft SQL Server all across the board, and also deliver new levels of insight and ability to act upon the data I already have that's, by the way, growing as fast as you can. Matt and I are laughing because I've called big data the new cloud washing before. I'll say it again. It's not about how big the data is. It's really about how you can help your customers act upon it, regardless of what that data type is, growth rate is. That doesn't matter to your customers. Your customers know that they're under the gun, they have to change, and they're looking for the fastest, least disruptive way to do it. And before we start to wrap this up, there was a question that came in around telco providers and business intelligence, and I'll hand that to Matt for a minute.
Yeah. So before I get into telcos in there, Elizabeth and I have gone back and forth on big data, and we share cubes right next to each other. My chafe on big data and analytics and BI across the board from all the hype isn't that it's not a valuable tool, but it is not the end-all, be-all to everything. It's not going to solve all of your business problems and make everything run smoothly and beautifully, and, won't it be great when we all speak Esperanto and everything will work perfectly together. The issue is it's a very, very powerful tool. Big data is a very powerful tool, and it can solve a lot of things if used correctly. Where I see IBM having an advantage and where I see some of the other services providers stepping in is in helping define what the customers can expect and setting realistic expectations for the BI services and solutions and what the business outcomes can be. And so I think that's what's going to drive this transition. And so I think Jen was right when she positioned IBM in a unique spot. And at this point, Allison, how would you like to handle Q&A?
Nope. Actually, before we jump to Q&A, there were a couple of points we wanted to highlight the industry discussion for a moment, but because from here we're looking at what's coming for all of you in this market, the ability to really take your customers to new levels of satisfaction and engagement are how we can best advise you going forward. When we look at the overarching levels of satisfaction in this market, customers are happy, but there is room for customers to be even more engaged going forward, because when we looked at customers saying whether or not solutions exceeded their expectations, they weren't there, which shows that there is opportunity to move your customers from a point of understanding what a product does to a point of understanding what business intelligence can do. When we interviewed some of our respondents around the idea of what stood in the way of satisfaction, the thing that struck us was that data management strategies, data governance, a lack of an overwhelming plan for why business intelligence was purchased in the first place. It was a consistent driver in the last study. It's a consistent driver again. So there's really an opportunity for overarching points of why are we doing this and what does it mean to our business to still be brought to bear to benefit your customers. And that's where you, either on your own or in conjunction with a CNSI partner, can really take these conversations forward. It's about helping your customers see the path to transformation and not just the path to a single product and getting that product implemented and in place. Because when you look at disruptive technologies like in-memory and in-memory technology, there's still a real point of what that product is and can be for a vendor and for impacting a vendor's portfolio. But in-memory databases in particular are not just about how you can take this market and take these products and increase the speed, increase transactions, increase effectiveness, but bring the application closer to the database. And this is something that Matt was putting together for us and some of you may have heard us at the start of the year, the idea of the in-memory database and the application becoming their own integrated appliance. This has the opportunity to impact not just business intelligence applications, but broader industry applications, as he touched on a moment ago. The world of applications and databases are converging, and it's the embedded analytics that really is the path to keeping not only the customers engaged over time, but keeping the broader level of purchasing swinging in your direction. And looking at the services side of that, when our respondents were asked about in-memory technology, do they plan on using a services vendor to help them? Yes, they do, overwhelmingly so. So are you that vendor if you're working on in-memory? Potentially. If you are not that vendor, who is your partner? And more than that, which 5 or 7 or 10 vendors are your partners? How do you stay most engaged with them over time to get things moving forward? So with that, we will now turn it over to Q&A, and I know we've addressed some of them in the queue already, Allison. Do we have
a couple more that have come through, so if anybody else has additional questions, please send them through now. The next question we have, everyone, is where within advanced BI tools, i.e. advanced analytics, does TBRC customers' interest most targeted?
We touched on that a little bit, and so I think we might go back and forth for a few minutes, but I'll start with my point of view. I think the idea of social analytics is one that has the opportunity to really resonate not just across business intelligence, but across industry applications and into broader implementation going forward. I know Jen and I were talking about the social mobile analytics on the services side of things in terms of new practices, but that's where you see a lot of industry impact immediately. I'm thinking of SAP and Oracle, which are some of the central points of my coverage, and SAP's recent launch of the Industry Cloud, as well as Oracle's recent acquisitions around Blue Kai and additions to the Marketing Cloud. Those impact retailer customers, consumer products customers, so many of these industries that directly deal with end users, and so I think that's a big opportunity point just in probably the next 3 to 6 months.
And before we get to the next one, it occurs to me that Elizabeth passed it over to me, and I was going to answer a telco question, and then, as I occasionally do being color commentary, I went on a minor tangent, but I thought it was relevant at the point in time. The question had to do with whether or not any of the telcos are stepping to the forefront, and what do we see out of them in terms of BI as a service. At this point, I'm not necessarily see anybody in the telco area really making a lot of noise in that. I think there are clearly very strong opportunities for telcos and other service providers, not services providers, you know, the telco service providers, to partner with some of the BI vendors to offer BI as a service. I'm just not necessarily sure I've seen a lot of movement in that direction. If there's something out there that I'm missing and somebody wants to bring it up, always happy to have a conversation. But I haven't seen any of the big telcos doing anything that I would consider particularly novel or industry-leading in this area.
Okay. The next question we have is, how are software vendors already positioned within CNSI vendors? Where does this impact BI now and going forward?
So I'll start with this, and then I'll tip it to Jen around IBM, because I think IBM is one of those interesting use cases in terms of playing nicely with everyone. But when I look at the software vendor ecosystem, specifically the enterprise application ecosystem, the usual suspects continue to stay top of mind, but where I see the opportunity for a lot of the software vendors in business intelligence to make some headway is really in telling that heterogeneous story. I watch, just to segue into a slightly different subset for right now, but I watch a firm like Workday around human capital management starting to really woo and engage the Accentures, Deloittes of the world, and poaching a lot of enterprise software application competitor executives to do it. And so when we talk to these vendors in our research, they tell us they go where their end customers lead them. And so I think that's the message I would give to all of you is you have the opportunity to really drive a groundswell point of engagement such that when you go talking to the CNSI vendors for new points of outreach, they've already heard of you, and they've already heard of the particular offering you're trying to move. So taking advantage of a model of engagement that was built and established by market leaders around implement and engage going forward is how you can really move the needle with services firms to make sure you're in their deck of cards.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for IBM, you know, that certainly holds true as well. I mean, I'm sure that on the corporate level, they would love to be selling only their own software as part of services engagements, but they do realize that their first, you know, for their first priority is to the customer and what the customer needs and what is going to, you know, ultimately drive their business outcomes. So that is why they are still very active in partnering as well with BI software vendors just to offer a more holistic portfolio to their customers.
Okay. We have one additional question in queue, everyone, so if anyone out there still listening has any additional questions, please send them through now. The last question we have right now is, where is the next wave of BI disruption? Where is the next wave of disruption for BI software?
I think that it's where BI takes, where the idea of the embedded in-app analytics becomes the next new product. I think to date, the embedded analytics discussion has really been about an incremental point of advantage to defend existing applications install bases. So I think it's been a we have to be there, so we will be. But I think that the idea of transforming the business application through embedded analytics really has yet to take off. So when the analytic application meets the embedded analytics and really rethinks the way a business is run, that's, I think, the next big wave of opportunity. Matt, anything you'd add?
No, I'm not sure where the next wave is coming from. I think there's still a lot of work to be done on this wave, so I'm not ready to figure out where the next one is coming, because I think there's too much, not low-hanging, but call it slightly higher than low-hanging fruit to get to before you start getting the next wave.
Great. So we don't have any additional questions in queue at this time, so I'm going to start to wrap up the conversation. I want to thank all of the analysts for their time today, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on this webinar. We do hope you found it valuable. A couple quick things as you're on your way out. I did say that I would share all the social media links with you. I swear to God. So I do encourage you to follow us on Twitter, SlideShare, YouTube, and join our user groups on LinkedIn. As you're leaving the webinar, there's a quick survey, 3 questions. How valuable was the presentation? How good were the presenters? And if you have any additional open-ended feedback for us in terms of how we can improve our webinars or bring more value to, that would be wonderful if we could get that feedback back from you. As Elizabeth mentioned, we do have additional webinars coming up over the next couple of days. We've got our BI software vendor benchmark webinar coming up, our BI services vendor benchmark coming up, and is there one more?
The software portfolio discussion at the end of the month.
Okay, so we've got those 3 webinars coming up, so we do hope you're available to join us for those, and if not, you want to get the deck, please do reach out to us. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinars as we move forward with our BI portfolio. Thanks, everyone.